Shalom and welcome to Yeshiva B'nai Noach. I'm Tom Abrona. We've looked at who the Messiah will be in terms of both general and specific characteristics. So next we'll move into a very controversial topic, and that is when we can expect him. And every generation wants it to be in their time, and this generation is no different. We know Maimonides tells us we should expect him to come right now, but I think there are some very compelling reasons why indeed it could happen in this generation. However, and we'll address this in more detail later, as we look at the list of events prophesied to take place before Messiah comes, we'll say, but this has happened before. And that is why predictions are so difficult, why there have been more than 50 Messiah claimants in the last 2,025 years. So let's take a look and see. The time we're in now is called by the rabbis Ikvot Mashiach, the footsteps in the footsteps of the Messiah. It's the time immediately before Mashiach comes. Most of the information here is from Sanhedrin 97 in the Talmud, chapter 97. So there's good news and bad news. Bad news first. We have several things that we're looking for, or that at least have been prophesied will happen in the end of days. One is an increase in insolence and impudence, especially in leadership. In other words, chutzpah in leadership, if you will. So, and again, as we look at these things, what we're looking at is to say, all right, we know these things are general and can be applied to many eras, but do we see them in our own? Do we see them in an obvious way? It's not that it's hidden, it's obvious, it's out there in front of everyone. So those are the questions you're kind of asking yourself as we go through these. So again, an increase in impudence and insolence, well, depending on your political viewpoint, that certainly may be applicable in today's times, especially here in America. Well, actually all over the world, not just here in America. Another thing is oppressing inflation. And I think we can see that that's at least beginning to happen, or in the process of happening. Again, we're looking at America, but thinking about the world as well as we take a look at this. And certainly in Israel is another place that we want to especially check and see if these things work. And again, that idea of increasing in insolence and impudence can certainly be applied to politics, perhaps in Israel, and the idea of oppressing inflation. So the next thing we'll take a look at is unbridled irresponsibility on the part of authorities. Those in leadership positions taking what many would see as irresponsible attitudes towards their countries, their laws, their different aspects of the lives of their citizens. So do we see that? That's a question. I think we can say we do. The next thing is that centers of learning will turn into bawdy houses. Houses of prostitution is actually the way it's put. And it's interesting. I mean, there's a lot of ideas behind what this means, but just taking it on face value, one of the things that and complaints that I've heard many times, and I have seen it myself in attendance at various colleges, is that the universities today are not as much places of learning, but as places of socializing. To some degree, socializing is good, but to the point that it is now more of a party central kind of a situation, I think we can see that is definitely taking place. The next thing, of course, wars. And again, we've certainly had wars for forever, but do we see that increasing, and do we see it now increasing involving Israel in a greater degree? There's a quote from the Talmud that says, when you see nations fighting each other, look towards the feet of Mashiach. Bereshit Rabbah 42:4. Also, we have the idea of many destitutes begging with none to pity them. So we have the idea here that we are in a world where poverty and social injustice, if you will, is rampant. Again, I think we can see that. Wisdom shall be putrid, and the idea that wisdom itself is not valued, is not something that is honored. Again, doesn't mean everywhere, doesn't mean everyone, but do we see that in our society? And perhaps we'll come to the same conclusion I do, or I did, which is that yes, it is there. The next thing kind of related to that one is that the pious shall be despised. The people who speak the truth, the people who establish what they see as the law based on Torah, and teach it. In many cases, they're ridiculed or despised or not taken seriously. So again, we can see that here, and we can see that in Israel as well. And then again, another related one to that is that the truth will be abandoned. We live in a world where the facts can be altered based on the needs of whoever's trying to express the facts. We talked about this early on, that truth is in and of itself is universal. Real truth is universal. But oftentimes we deal with facts and call them truth. But facts have an expiration date, just as at one time the earth was considered flat, as that was a fact, no longer. But again, the idea of truth, and I think of the Hebrew word, and I don't have that up here to show you, but it's comprised of 3 letters. The letters are Aleph, Mem, and Tav. The Hebrew word for truth is Emet. It's also considered an aspect or a name of God. And the beautiful thing about the Hebrew word Emet is that it is the 3 letters are Aleph, which is the first letter of the alphabet, and Mem in the middle, which is the middle of the alphabet, and Tav, which is the final letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So the idea that truth encompasses all things is a part of that. But we don't look at this in this day and age. We find the news outlet that we like, or we find the opinions that agree with us, and that's what we look for. We don't necessarily look for truth. We look for agreement with what we think we believe and what we think is truth. Again, that's a personal opinion, but I think we can see that that's definitely an aspect of what's going on in today's times. This one, the young will insult the old. The idea that, again, wisdom, age, we have a throwaway society. We sadly in this country and probably many others. I know this country more than any other, and I know from my own personal experience with my mother and the things that she went through, that old age is not honored. It is something that we put away into a home and hope that it goes away. And that is, to me, what this means, what this is all about. The young will insult the old. Family breakup with mutual recriminations. We do see a lot of the idea that there are dysfunctional families in the world. And again, not something that's brand new, but something that we can see is growing perhaps in this age. The idea of hopelessness. And again, a quote from the Talmud says, "When you see a generation ever dwindling, hope for him. When you see a generation overwhelmed by many troubles, as by a river, await him." Sanhedrin 98a. The idea that many of us feel a sense of hopelessness, a sense that how can anything possibly change? The world is not changing. We go through the same things over and over again, and that generates this feeling of hopelessness. That will increase even more as we approach the final days, according to this prophecy or these prophecies. And again, related to that, it's always darkest before the dawn. The darkest moments of the night are immediately before daybreak, the Zohar says. So we have the idea again of that hopelessness, but as it gets darker and darker, the good news is we're getting closer and closer to the dawn. A battle of faith. And the idea here is that leaders will cause much suffering, especially to the Jewish people testing their faith daily. Still, in the end of days, evil will cease to exist, and everyone, even they, will be rectified. That's from Tikkun Zohar, page 144a, Zohar 3, 124b, and 232b, several places that you'll find comments on that. And then the last one is immorality and rebelliousness. Immorality and rebelliousness increase. Again, always have seen this in every generation, but in this generation, in the entertainment industry, in the things that we tend to prize or put value on, and this is why today in the generations preceding Mashiach, there's much ado about having children, contraception, abortion, so on. The idea of identification. So as the time for the final rectification looms over the horizon, the evil inclination realizes that its time is running out. That concept you can find in several places in the Talmud as well. So we see here in all of these ideas from Sanhedrin 97 and on that many things can be, as we look at them, many things can be thought of as not only happening in our generation, but increasing in our generation. From another source in the Talmud, Sotah 49b, we find some additional things to look for or look at. Chutzpah will increase, so kind of the same thing we said earlier on, but the idea again that this is throughout society, not just in leadership. We also see, this is kind of an interesting one, many grapes, but wine is expensive. So what does that mean? Well, the basic interpretation of it is the idea of greed. Even though there's lots and the prices should be down, the concept here is that greed will bring those prices up. It will also increase addictions as something becomes more readily available, and then it also becomes or can become an addiction. So those are the two things. We're looking for greed, a world that is greedy, and a world that is full of addictions. Again, I think we can see that. Partying and drinking, interesting. Again, going along with the idea of addictions. That idea that it's all about me society. It's all about my own enjoyment, and usually that's at the expense of others. Then we have also spiritual vaccines exposed to a bit of evil to build immunity. The idea here is that we see that there are, and this is kind of a mixed bag. It's sort of a positive as well as a negative. The idea that we have many places where we have solutions to evil, and that evil itself, and think of what a vaccine does. It takes the disease itself or the bacteria, whatever, and in small doses, and helps you build immunity towards it. So as evil increases in the world, there's a sense that there's also a building up of an immunity towards it. But that can also mean that it's ignored and not dealt with. Okay? So several things to look at there. The next thing is heresy and rulership. Again, looking especially at Israel, but all over the world, we can see that there are things in people in the leadership positions that are not Not necessarily those things that the Torah teaches are good. Also, the idea that there's no Sanhedrin in place. And part of the reason I think that there's no Sanhedrin in place is because you have to come up with 70 plus 72, 71, 72, 73, depending on what you're looking at. You have to find that many Torah scholars and that many Torah scholars who are humble, and that many Torah scholars who are humble and wise, and that many Torah scholars who are humble, wise, and compassionate, and respected by all the people. So that is decreasing. That those kinds of people are decreasing. Again, fewer Torah scholars, more decrees against the people. No rebuke is the next one. No rebuke given. Everything is permissible. And we definitely see that in our entertainment industry and in the pervasive attitude throughout our country. We also have places of learning turned into places of immorality. That's actually a repeat of one that we saw in the other one. The truth not to be found. Again, we repeat of something we talked about before, but truth is something that is replaced with facts, and those facts are related to what I want to believe. The next one is the young will not honor elders' tradition. This is similar to the one we saw before, but this has more to do with learning. And not just learning, but also obedience to tradition, as Tebbe would talk about. So there's that. The old feel powerless. Yes, all of us feel powerless, but especially, again, as we talked about before, the idea that old age is not honored and put away into a home. And then again, related to that, youth is worshipped. Related in the same way, we have a very youth-oriented society. So, and then we also look at the idea that all is good, nothing is wrong. That's from Midrash Rabbah Shir HaShirim. The rulership will deny God, all is good. And then the Sanhedrin, this is, again, a positive thing in here, and it kind of goes back to the fact that there's no Sanhedrin currently. But as we approach the end of times, there is supposed to be a reformation of the Sanhedrin. And the prophecy says it'll be in Tiberias, where it ended by the Sea of Galilee. So we're awaiting to see how that happens, when that happens, if that happens, as a sign of the end times. We've talked about the ingathering before. Kind of, I'm looking at this for slightly different aspect, but the idea that all exiles are the result of the loss of unity. Unity is a very important thing to look for and to have, but something that is missing as we approach the end times, and we see it less and less. The Talmud teaches that the exile's purpose also was to bring converts, the lost sheep of the house of Israel. I talk about this in a lot more detail in the Noahide class, but this is a very important point as to why, one of the reasons why we are in exile, and that is to find. And how do we do that? Again, the Noahide class talks about that in a great deal of more in greater detail. But to find the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Jesus said, I came for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So same idea there. And also when Israel is whole together, doing what they're supposed to do, the world is whole. As goes Israel, so goes the world, is I think a saying that we could popularize. And it's the idea that that unity is very, very important in terms of the world and what we're what we're hoping for, and what we're looking for. And that's something that won't completely happen until Messiah, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many prophecies. But unity is so vital, and how do we, what's missing? We can see the importance of unity in several places in Torah, and in Tanach, in Torah, Leviticus 19:18, love your fellow as yourself. As we follow that commandment, that brings unity. Psalm 15:1 says, 1 through 5 says a song by David, who shall sojourn in your tent, and who shall dwell on your holy mountain? One who walks with integrity and does righteousness and speaks truth in his heart, who does not slander with his tongue, does not do evil to his fellow, and does not tolerate the disgracing of his neighbor, in whose eyes a vile person is despised, who honors those who fear God, who takes an oath to his own detriment and does not abjure, who does not put his money in usury, does not take the most innocent bribe. He who does these things shall never fall. Isaiah 33:15 says, he who walks righteously and speaks uprightly, he that despises the gain of oppression, shakes his hand from the holding of bribes, stops his ears from the hearing of blood, and shuts his eyes from the seeing of evil. And as I read this, I think about how accurate this is in terms of the kinds of movies that we do go see. That have to do with blood and evil, and these are the things that Hollywood thrives on. Again, there are good movies out there, but for the most part, it's something that we're seeing over and over again that is happening in increasing evidence in our society. Micah 6:8 says, what does God require of you but to do justice, love charity, and walk humbly with your God? And finally, Psalm 133:1, how good and how pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity. So again, that idea, the very importance of unity, and the sign in today's time is the lack of unity as we approach. And part of the job of the Messiah is to bring the exiles back and to bring unity back to Israel. So another thing to look at is the fear of God. Now, I want to give a verse here. Habakkuk 2:14 states, for the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. We've talked about that verse before. The idea that in the Messianic age, the knowledge of the glory of the Lord will fill the world. It won't be something that'll be covered or hidden in any way. Now, how does that relate to fear? Well, it's interesting that Proverbs puts knowledge and fear together. Now, the word for knowledge is da'at, but in Proverbs it says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and that's chokmah. So chokmah is directly related to fear, and the knowledge, the da'at of the Holy One, is understanding, Proverbs 9:10. So the idea of fear, when most of us think of fearing God, we think of being afraid, of somehow worrying, stressing, but it's very different from being afraid. Fear of God is rooted in ignorance. It's not understanding who God is and the awesomeness of God. So what fear of God really is, it's just a sense of wonder. And you can think about that if you've ever seen the ocean, or especially the first time you saw the ocean, first time you saw, I'm thinking of there's a movie, I can't think of the name of it now, but where the fire is the star of the show. It's actually a character in the way that the movie is done. But the awesomeness, destructive awesomeness, but the awesomeness of fire, what L.A. went through recently, the idea that yes, it's destructive, but there's a feeling of wow, what power is there? And in some cases, you want to be afraid of that power. But like the ocean and like gravity, there's this sense of awe, and that doesn't necessarily involve fear. Also, the fear of God has to do with being rooted in truth and understanding, again, that there is a supreme truth, a truth that encompasses everything. And that is a part of who God is and what God represents and what the Messiah represents to us, who the Messiah is. And also then, in order to pray effectively and joyfully, we have to feel that awe. We have to know before whom we stand. And that's part of the fear of God. And the Zohar says that fear is the gateway to heaven. Again, not being afraid, but fear as in awe and wonder. And that is what the Zohar is talking about here. So what we, again, dealing with the end times, what we see is that this is missing, that there is no sense of wonder or awe at the world around us, the creation, and therefore no sense of awe at God, who God is. We take that word for granted as something that is either our own personal slot machine to get what we want from, or someone that is so far removed from us that it has no place or value in our lives. So that, again, is something that we see happening in the world around us. So now the good news. Again, these are prophecies also that relate to the end days and what things will be like in those times. And we've talked about some of these in the negative. We can see them also in the positive. So a good measure of prosperity. We live in a world today where prosperity is just out there for everyone. It really is. Even those living in poverty today are much better off than those in the past who have lived in poverty. So we have that huge, the world of prosperity, really, around the world. And yes, there are people who are living in destitution, but for the most part, overall, we have a world that is very prosperous. And certainly, there's enough to go around for everyone if it were as it should be, as if we are each responsible for our fellow, then there would be plenty of prosperity to go around for everyone. Also, we have Torah study, renewal of Torah study. And this kind of goes along with this opening of the gates of wisdom above and the well springs of wisdom below. The Gaon of Vilna in the 17th century, I believe, spoke about this very strongly and a very powerful teaching and very mystically oriented. But the thing that the Gaon said was that in the end times, that the gates of wisdom above and the well springs of wisdom below will open together. And what we see, and the purpose of that happening, according to him, is that as technology advances, and we have more scientific and technological discoveries, a manifestation and propagation of the mystical teachings of the Torah take place. What that means is, in other words, many times you and I probably have both done this. We begin talking about things in terms of technology. So we talk about garbage in, garbage out in terms of the things that we focus on, because that's a computer term. That's a computer idea. Many of the things that were hidden in the Kabbalah, in the mystical aspects of Judaism, become explained as scientific and technological discoveries come about. And this is a class in and of itself, highly recommend, as I always do. Efraim Palvanov has several videos that deal with this as well. But the idea that the purpose of this increase in science and technology is not necessarily for the betterment of man as much as it is for helping us to really understand the mysteries of God. So, and one of the things that the Vilna Gaon talked about, which sadly was not followed, is that he stressed the importance of rabbinical training, including science and technology. Unfortunately, most yeshivas today, that's not a part of the curriculum. But his point was that if the rabbis, and not including myself, I'm not a rabbi, but if the rabbis don't take advantage of this knowledge, that they'll be left behind and the world will not see the spiritual aspects of it. And indeed, that is what has happened. Science is somehow considered an adversary of religion, and it shouldn't be. Science and technology should be hand in hand with the idea that these are all things that God has given us to improve our lives and to make our lives more able to give the glory to God. So again, that's something that is the good news. We're seeing that happening. It's not always taken in a positive way, but it is definitely part of the good news. The other thing is that prophecy shall be restored to Israel prior to the coming of Mashiach. That's in Sanhedrin 97a, but and that kind of has to do with this a little bit here, but more here, a manifestation and propagation of the mystical teachings of the Torah. That really is a lot of what the prophecy aspect is all about. And in the time that Mashiach will awaken, many signs and miracles will occur in the world. And again, as I said, that prophecy shall be restored prior to the Mashiach. So I want to spend just a brief bit of extra time on this. In the time that Mashiach will awaken, many signs and miracles will occur in the world. Now, people reading this will say, okay, well, I'm looking for the Red Sea to part. I'm looking for some incredible miracle to happen. But again, looking at what we have in the world today, cell phones, those are miracles. Hot and cold running water, those are miracles. We have so many miracles in the world today, and in part thanks to the science and technology that exists. That's what this is talking about. That those miracles that we take for granted are things that occur in this day and age that have never, ever, ever occurred before, at least as far as we know, in recorded history. So that's what the miracles are all about. We're not talking about Red Seas parting. We're talking about everyday common events that we take for granted, but that are actually miracles to someone viewing them from the past. So think about that as we look at this. And then let's take a look a little bit at Eliyahu. Legend has it that Eliyahu Hanavi will come a full day before the Mashiach comes to announce his arrival. That you can find that in Eruvin 43b, other places in the Talmud, and it says, to make peace, Rabbi Yehoshua said, Eliyahu will push away those that are close and draw those that are far. Rabbi Shimon said, Eliyahu will negotiate an agreement between the different opinions of the rabbinical authorities. The sages say that Eliyahu will not come to distance some or to draw others close. His mission is to make peace between peoples. It's thus written, Malachi 3:24, he shall turn the hearts of the fathers to their children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers. So all of this is important to recognize the purpose of Eliyahu, and that is to bring that unity that we talked about before. So we're still looking for Eliyahu to arrive. And if we are close, then it should happen soon. But the idea that he will eliminate or help eliminate falsehood. And here's the interesting thing about the word, again, looking to the Hebrew. Word for falsehood is shecher, three letters which are adjacent to one another. They're very close. They're very close. So falsehood is when you hide things behind other things. You try and cover the truth by hiding it, seeing the forest for the trees kind of a concept. Whereas truth, which is emet, and it's spelled with the first letter of the alphabet, the middle letter, and the last letter of the alphabet. So we have the idea with that truth encompasses all things. And Eliyahu will push away those that are close, are falsehood. These letters are close. So the imagery here is that's Eliyahu's job, is to eliminate falsehood, things that are close, and draw close those that are far, which is truth. Aleph is as far away from Tav as you can get, the beginning and the end, as Jesus called it, the Alpha and the Omega. Again, Likutai Mohan 1:117. So the idea that I believe with complete faith in the coming of the Mashiach, and though he may tarry, I will await his coming every day. When we ask, when is Mashiach coming, we know the answer, today, for he can come today. But Elijah explained in one of the Midrash, one of the stories in the Talmud, that today means Psalm 95:7, which says, today, if you hearken to his voice, Mashiach can certainly come, but we must first turn to God. So repentance is great for the sake of the one individual who repents. God forgives him and the entire world. Talmud, Yoma 86b. So he's coming today, if, but we still believe he's coming very, very soon. Let's address now the point that I made earlier on. Haven't these things happened before? So one of the ways that is easiest, I think, to understand what we're talking about is, and this is an analogy that you find both in the Hebrew scriptures as well as the Christian scriptures. Think about a woman who's about to give birth. Not that I've ever been there, but I've been around my wife who did and was. There can be several times when it appears to be that there are labor pains. The birth is about to happen, but it turns out to be false. But the fact that the pains steadily increase and worsen generally means that the birth is indeed imminent. So we're looking for all of the facts, all of the things that we've talked about, increasing and growing in intensity. The other thing to think about is, again, as we look at this exile ending, which is what will happen when Mashiach comes, and we've been in this exile for almost 2,000 years, we can look to the previous exile, the Exodus, as an example. And we find in Exodus 3:9, it says, now the cry of the Israelites has reached me. Moreover, I have seen how the Egyptians oppress them. Well, okay, the cry and the oppression didn't just happen the day before God called Moses. It had been happening for years. But again, as that increased, the cry increased, the oppression increases, finally the Messiah, or God in this case, sent Moses as the Messiah to free Israel from its bondage. That is the same concept that we're looking for in terms of the Messiah to come, like Moses, that he'll be sent to free us from our bondage, and that bondage includes all of the things that the world is going through that are not positive in any way. Right? So again, yes, these things have happened before. That doesn't mean that we ignore them. It means that we look at it and say, okay, now would be a good time. Again, I always think of Tevye, and Fiddler on the Roof in examples. But the idea that in Fiddler on the Roof it says, wouldn't this be a good time for the Messiah to come? And the rabbi says, shouldn't we, in other words, shouldn't we stay here and wait? This would be a good time the Messiah would come. The rabbi responds by saying, yes, but we shall have to wait for him somewhere else. So the idea that that we do await the Messiah, but we don't sell everything we own, as has happened in the past with some of the false messiahs that have come about. And we don't change our beliefs. We continue on until we finally see the arrival of the Messiah. We now begin the section that many commentators, including Maimonides, have warned against, but interestingly enough, each one that warned against it did it themselves, and that is making a prediction regarding when the Messiah will come, including Maimonides. So before I present any of this material, I want to give this warning and a disclaimer in the form of a cautionary tale. We live in very dangerous and exciting times. There is so much fervor and expectation of Messiah. Such was the first century. Yeshua, many followers, rabbis denounced him. He died shortly after. And the second century, Bar Kokhba, rabbis, he came, was announced as Messiah, and then rabbis denounced him, and he failed and died shortly after. 8th century, we see Abu Isa from Iran, Persia, similar to Muhammad, 10,000 followers, great military victories. In the end, rabbis denounced him, and he lost power and died shortly after. 12th century, David al-Roy, Kurdistan, many followers, rabbis denounced him, he died shortly after. 13th century, Abraham Abulafia was born, 1240, in Aragon, Spain. He went to convert the Pope to Judaism. Nicholas III sentenced him to death. However, the Pope died first, and he was released. Many followers predicted the Messiah in 1290. Rabbis denounced him, and he withdrew and later died, but left many writings still read today. The most notorious, the 17th century Shabbatai Zvi from Turkey, not a scholar, manic depressive, married the Torah, all kinds of bizarre things, broke biblical commandments, said they were no longer binding. Fourth marriage was to a Polish Jewish prostitute and fortune teller, proclaimed Zvi Messiah. He went to Israel, great scholar. Nathan of Gaza proclaimed him Messiah and became his press agent. Millions of followers now back in Turkey, many miracles. It's estimated that half of total world Jewry followed him, both Sephardi and Ashkenazi. Many Christians reconverted to Judaism. Everyone expected they would be traveling to Israel, miraculously, and soon. 1666 set out for Constantinople to receive the Sultan's crown, possession of land of Israel. Convert or die, he was told. He became Islam, he converted. But many followers believed it was still part of the plan. Conversion equated with Jesus' crucifixion. Now rabbis spoke out. His death did not end his movement. And to this day, there are Sabbateans, and one of his followers, Jacob Frank, continued his work almost a century later, and his followers are called Frankists. And the name of the man, Jacob Frank, believed himself to be reincarnated. Born 50 years, I said a century, born 50 years after. So all of these messiahs came and went. And Jerry Rabau, his book, 50 Jewish Messiahs, The Untold Stories, has all of this information in it. Very fascinating read to look at. So the point of all this is that we can expect with certainty that someone will claim the title of Messiah soon, both for the Christian world as well as the Jewish, and possibly both together. Put him to the test. Don't rule him out. Be very careful. The bottom line is to please recognize that ever since the first century and even before that, each generation was convinced the Messiah would come in their time. And in many of those times, the fervor was like it is today. It's very likely that now as then, someone or many someones will step up to claim the title of Messiah. Hopefully, You'll have the tools to recognize truth from fiction, but just be careful. Don't immediately discount someone because he doesn't fit your expectations, and don't accept someone just because he does. This will be true, as I said, for both Christians as well as Jews. Put him to the test, and I've talked to you about what that test is, but don't rule him out. Be very careful. I've mentioned his name before. I will mention it many times, I'm sure. But in my opinion, one of the greatest teachers about the end times and Mashiach and Noachides and just about anything else you can think of on the YouTube right now is Efraim Palvanov. He is not a rabbi, but he's definitely rabbinically trained and based in Canada. But anyway, this material that I'm going to give here, a little bit of this information, is talked about in a lot more detail in his videos. I will put a link to his videos in the description so that you can, at your leisure, take a look at them, but I highly recommend them to you. Much more detail, much more information, much more rabbinic focus than what I give here. So what we're talking about here is a section in Talmud in Sanhedrin 97a that talks about a 7-year cycle leading up to the coming of Mashiach. And it says in there, quote, the sages taught in a Bereta with regard to the 7-year period, that is the sabbatical cycle, during which the Messiah, son of David, comes. During the first year, this verse will be fulfilled, and I will cause it to rain upon one city and cause it not to rain upon another city. Amos 4:7. So the idea that in the first year there's strange weather phenomenon. During the second year of that period, arrows of famine will be shot, indicating that there will be famine only in certain places. Arrows of famine means, again, that famine only in certain places. But famine, the word for famine, can also mean plague or a general catastrophe, so keep that in mind. During the third year, there will be a great famine, and men, women, children, the pious men of action will die, and the Torah is forgotten by those who study it. So this great famine or great plague, many die, Torah forgotten. We're gonna see all of these, how it plays out in our time here in just a moment. Year 4, during the 4th year there will be plenty, but not great plenty. During the 5th year there will be great plenty, and they will eat and drink and rejoice, and the Torah will return to those who study it. During the 6th year there will be heavenly voices heard, the sounds of war. During the sabbatical year, the 7th year, the war of Gog-Magog will be waged involving the Jewish people. And during the year after the conclusion of the sabbatical year, the Son of David will come. So, what follows is an interpretation of this timeline from Palvanov. The graphic you see up here encapsulates those 6 years, according to Palvanov, from 2018 to the present. Understand, as we said, the word for famine can also be understood as plague in general throughout Torah. When you have a plague, you can also have a famine, or at least famine concerns. So the first year, strange weather phenomenon, that could apply to many years, that's true, but we place that in 2018, or he does, Palvanov does, 2018. But 2019 begins to be a little more focused as the arrows of famine or plague are being shot. If you think about it, it's when we first started to hear about COVID. So that fits very nicely into there. 2020 saw the full-blown effects of the plague causing many deaths. COVID hit Orthodox Jews especially hard, so we have the idea that Torah is forgotten and that many die. Then in 2021, we saw the beginning of the return of normalcy. And as the prophecy states, plenty but not great plenty. But then in 2022, normalcy returned, the economy rebounded, so there we have great plenty. Great plenty took place in year 5. In 2023 is where it gets really interesting as the sounds of war rang out. Again, the sounds of war means that there were many wars all around, but it was the beginning of the Great War. And here we have in 2023 Ukraine, civil war concerns in Israel, and at the end of 2023, October 7th massacre took place. So that all again fitting up very nicely there. Then in the last year of the prophetic cycle, the end of which came in September, October with Rosh Hashanah, this became a full-scale war for Israel. So, and that continues. I mean, we have the rumors of peace, possibly, but at any rate, we'll keep an eye on that. We're taking this a day at a time at this point. So now in the first year after the cycle we're in 2025, and if that interpretation of the prophecy is correct, then we may see at least hints of Elijah and Messiah coming soon. How close are we? Well, let's take a look at some ideas here. The fourth day of creation, God created the sun and the moon and the stars, and it tells why he created them, for signs and for seasons, to denote the festivals, to denote days and years, but also signs for various things. So we think of one of the greatest signs throughout ancient history as well as modern history has been the total solar eclipse. It's only possible on Earth, and the reason, and that makes it significant, the reason it's only possible on Earth is that the sun is 400 times larger than the moon and 400 times farther away. So it couldn't happen in any other place in any other way. Makes it very significant. A side note is that in the sun, according to science, is 5,778 Kelvin in the heat. And just as an interesting aside, that is the year 2016, which takes us to the date of the first eclipse in our time, that the first major eclipse for the United States at any rate, and that eclipse split the nation. Interestingly enough, you may not be able to read all this, but I'll read it to you. Jesus said, "I will give a sign to this evil and adulterous generation, the sign of Jonah." So what was the sign of Jonah? And if we look back to what happened in Jonah's time, Jonah arrived in Nineveh around 763 BC, and there was an eclipse of the sun in 763 BC. What were other signs of Jonah? Well, there was a major plague that took place in 765 BCE and in 759 as well. Several military losses for the Assyrians. Major earthquake took place and a civil war, all during the reign of Ashur-dan III, 755 to 763, who was most generally accepted to be the person who was reigning in Nineveh at the time of Jonah's arrival. So now, 2016, we have that eclipse that split the nation. 7 years later, another eclipse happened April 2024 on the 1st of Nisan, and it also split the nation. And here's just a graphic to show that eclipse. The first one here, 2017, I think I was saying 2016, but 2017, okay, and then 2024 here. Two significant events that happened on or around this time. What happened? We have Trump in office, and then out of office, and then Trump in office again. Take that significance for whatever it is. But again, we do see in this nation a great division, almost 50-50, and that's something that is concerning. But that's the effect of a solar eclipse. So I want to take a look at one other thing here. I checked the last time there was a solar eclipse that crossed the United States, and that was in 2018. According to eventshistory.com, what was going on in 2018? We had the Ukrainian-Soviet War. Interesting. The Bolshevik Red Army, on its way to besiege Kiev, is met by a small group of military students at the Battle of Kruty. The first cause also of the 1918 flu pandemic took place. Very interesting, known as the Spanish flu. And that occurs the start of a devastating worldwide pandemic. The Bolsheviks killed Tsar Nicholas II of Russia and his family. And again, that signals then the end of the Tsar's reign and the beginning of the Bolsheviks, and communism would grow out of that. We have World War I. Germany signs an armistice with the world, and that was called the Armistice Agreement with the Allies of World War I. That happened just before this division. The Allies in a railroad car in a forest of Compiègne, France. The fighting officially ends at 11 a.m. 1918 was a difficult and transitional year with the world deep in World War I, a deadly flu pandemic at home. Armistice came in November, the 11th hour of the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, and the horrors of the war to end all wars began to abate. A new creative spirit flourished as modernism swept into art and design. That's according to the Smithsonian. So again, we see very important events took place all around this time of the solar eclipse. So that's kind of, again, the importance of the solar eclipse to what's going on in the world. So before we leave signs in the heavens, this one is interesting. Now, some of the information was written about this prior to its happening. I've tried to rewrite it, but just recognize that this was something that Efraim Palvanov spoke about before the comet appeared. But again, this has to do with the prophecy in Balak in Numbers 24:17. Where Balaam is talking about a star coming forth from Jacob. This is the same scripture that's used for the so-called Star of Bethlehem. But again, the prophecy is a very interesting prophecy. So again, dealing with Balak, in Numbers 24:17, the Zohar says the following: Balak, excuse me. I see him, excuse me, but not now. I gaze on him, but not soon. For some of these things were fulfilled at that time, and some of them afterwards, and some are for the time of King Mashiach. Quote, it has been taught in the future the Blessed Holy One will fashion and display a fixed star flashing with 70 streamers and 70 jets flaring from it in the middle of the sky. 70 other stars will be absorbed by it, and it will glow and shine for 70 days. On the 6th day it will appear, on the 25th day of the 6th month, and it will disappear on the 7th day at the end of 70 days. On the 1st day it will appear in the city of Rome, and on that day 3 high walls of the city will fall. A magnificent palace will collapse, and the city's ruler will die. Then that star will expand, becoming visible throughout the world, and at that time fierce wars will erupt in the world in all 4 directions, with no trust to be found among them. In the middle of the world, as that star shines in the middle of the sky, a certain great king and ruler will arise in the world, his spirit exalted over all kings, and he will provoke wars on 2 sides and overpower them. On the day when the star is concealed, the Holy Land will tremble 45 miles around the site where the temple stood, and an underground cave will be uncovered. From that cave will issue a mighty fire to burn the world, and from that cave will spread a grand lofty branch that will rule over the whole world, and to which will be given dominion, and to which the holy ones of the Most High will gather. Then King Mashiach will be revealed throughout the world, and when he is revealed, inhabitants of the world will suffer one calamity after another, and the enemies of Israel will prevail. Then the spirit of Mashiach will be aroused against them, and destroy the wicked Edom, and consume in fire the whole land of Seir. Of then is written, but Israel performs valiantly, Numbers 24:18. As is written, Edom will be dispossessed, Seir dispossessed by its enemies, the enemies of Israel, and then, but Israel performs valiantly. At that time, the Blessed Holy One will raise the dead of his people, and death will be forgotten by them. As is written, the right hand of Hashem performs valiantly. I shall not die, but live and recount the deeds of God. Psalm 118, 16, 17. And then Hashem will be king over all the earth. Zechariah 14:9. There is a specific date, and this is the most interesting part of this. There is a specific date given in this prophecy that is at least over 600 years old, and here it is. It says, quote, on the 6th day it will appear. On the 25th day of the 6th month it will disappear. On the 7th day at the end of 70 days. Now, the 6th day means it'll be on Friday. And it'll be Friday, the 25th day of the 6th month, which is Elul. And it just so happens, this is the part that when Palvanov first talked about that, just gave you goosebumps. But that is Friday, the 25th of Elul. So keep in mind, the 25th of Elul does not always fall on a Friday. So Palvanov came across that, shared it. It was interesting, and indeed, there is a comet predicted to appear as a very bright celestial object, Palvanov said, late this year. Remember, the prophecy spoke about streamers and jets of light coming from the star, and it certainly sounds like a comet. But wait, there's more. So again, the prophet, the comet did indeed appear in September. On September the 25th of Elul on Friday, it appeared, just as it was supposed to. So that was interesting. Now, and again, I put the links to Palvanov's videos. I urge you to go and watch. He has a series of 3 videos on the Jacob Star prophecy. And all of the things that are mentioned as part of the prophecy. Now, when Palvanov first talked about it, he gave some different ideas. Again, these are prophecies we don't know. We can just guess. But looking back then and seeing what actually did happen when the star or comet appeared, it really worked. It really did fulfill the prophecy. So you can take that or leave it. You can say, okay, we read into it what we want to, but it's fairly convincing. I'm not going to spend the time here to talk about it because Palvanov does such a wonderful job. I just encourage you to go watch that. But the point of all of this, is that I believe, and it seems as though the signs are there, that we are indeed very, very close. I want to talk about this one more time, the idea that it's forbidden to calculate the time. Again, our sages address this issue with a dire warning. In Sanhedrin 97b, it says, may those who calculate the time of Mashiach's arrival lose their breath of life. Now, and having said that, that's a dire warning, but yet the rabbis that talked about this in the Talmud, as well as Maimonides who talked about this, all gave a prediction of when the Messiah would appear. They were wrong, but they gave a prediction. So there must be a loophole. The reason given, and this is a very important reason, and it's one that I presented to you in the cautionary tale. If one sets a certain time for Mashiach's arrival and he doesn't appear, then this weakens the faith of all those who believed in Mashiach. And yet, prophets like Daniel and great sages throughout history have done it. They've made this prediction. One argument is that it can be approached as a woman in labor. A doctor may give a due date, but it's well known that that may not be accurate. Rather, our sages say, quote, never despair if he delays, wait for him, for he will come and will not be late, unquote. So the loophole seems to be that it's generally accepted we can never state anything with certainty. I can't say to you, yes, this will happen. But we can look to general possibilities. And even Maimonides mentions this in his writings, that that all we can do is look back. When the Messiah does come, we can look back and say, okay, now I see how everything was fulfilled. It's really, really impossible to deal with prophecy without knowing all of the facts. But at any rate, we can certainly use prophecy to look at generalities and to say, I think we're very close. So that's the loophole. Now, I'm going to do something here that is a lot more complicated than probably we have time for. I do want to bring the idea or express this idea to you. It may be that at this point you might want to stop the video and come back to this when you have more time, because again, it's some of you may be already done with the video for now. But at any rate, I think this is interesting and important information, but it gets back to the idea presented actually in Genesis, that and it's an idea accepted by both Christians and Jews, that the world as we know it will only last 6,000 years. Again, we accept that, both Christians and Jews. We are now, in the Hebrew calendar, in the year 5785. Okay, so how do we know that Genesis 1:1, Bereshit in Aramaic, can mean he created six? These are some of the reasons we know that the 6,000 years works. 6 Alephs, that could represent the 6,000-year cycle. 6 days of creation, as an example for the total time of this creation. Psalm 90, verse 4 says, "For in your sight 1,000 years are like yesterday, one day." Genesis 2:17 says, "For on the day you eat of it, you will surely die." So this was told to Adam when he ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And God said to him, "On the day you eat of it, you will surely die." Well, he didn't die that day, or did he? And that's, I mean, if he didn't, is God a liar? And that's the question that is asked here. But he isn't, if you think of a day, the day you eat of it, as 1,000 years. Adam indeed died 930 years prior or after that. 70 years were given up to King David. That's a whole other story. But he was supposed to live 1,000 years, which would be one day. So that is that understanding that says, no, God is not a liar. Indeed, Adam did die on the same day that he ate from the tree. Okay, so that's the idea. We have 6,000 years. Now, breaking that down, okay, in terms of days, first of all. So if we look here, so year 0 through 1,000 would be Sunday. 1,000 to 2,000 is Monday. 2 to 3,000 Tuesday. 3 to 4,000 Wednesday. 4 to 5,000 Thursday. 5 to 6,000 Friday. Friday is considered the day of Mashiach, the footsteps of Mashiach, all day Friday. That's from the year 5,000 to the year 6,000. As I said, we're in the year 5785 now. Another thing that is interesting or to talk about, not necessarily related to Mashiach, but it is. There's another way that this is broken down. The rabbis teach that the world that this can be broken up into 3 parts. The first 2,000 years were tohu v'bohu. That was prior to the flood. There was chaos. Things got way out of hand, and God brought the flood. The second 2,000 years is the restoration of non-chaos, the presenting of the law of Moses and of the Exodus. All of those happened in the next 2,000 years. That's the time of the law. And then the final 2,000 years, from 4,000 to 6,000, are called the times of Mashiach. So technically, Mashiach could have come any time in this time frame, 4,000 to 6,000. There's a prophecy that talks about the Messiah will come um, earlier in his time. I don't know the exact quote, but the point is that the Messiah could come early if Israel is ready. If not, then the final time when the Messiah has to come is the year 6000, and we'll look at that. I mean, that's the idea here. That 5 to 6,000 year time frame. Okay, and then I broke down, just for giggles and grins, the 5,000 year period, which began 6 p.m. on Thursday in the year 1240. And if we follow that through, 9 o'clock was the year 1360, midnight was 1470, 3 a.m. was 1600, 6 a.m. was 1740. That's when we pray the morning prayers. Interesting things happened in 1740. We'll talk a little bit about that. We're not going to spend a lot of time breaking it down, but just to show you here, 9 a.m. is the year 1860, 12 noon, now we move into modern times, and it's noon on Friday. This is the time when everybody's getting ready for the Sabbath, and that was the year 5750 or 1990. That's when the Mincha prayers are being prayed, and there is a prophecy that the Messiah, and we'll look at that in just a second, that the Messiah will come on during Mincha. Okay, so we're still in that time period of Mincha. Right now, actually, this should be 5785. We're in the year 2025, so that's right around 1 p.m. And then 2032 is 1 p.m. And then 2 p.m. is 2074, etc. 3 p.m., 4 p.m., 5 p.m. So this is the latest that Messiah can come, according to the prophecies. And then from 6 to 7,000 is Saturday, the Shabbat, and that starts in the year 2240. Okay, so keep those. Just take a look at that. We'll let you come back to it as you need to. Again, as a video, you can stop it and take your time with it. So this is why throughout the generations there have been many predictions of when the Messiah would arrive. And as I said, anytime between 4,000 and 6,000 are open as possibilities, and even a little before that. But at any rate, the idea that that we don't know the date or the time, okay? But one of the dates, based on the teachings of the Zohar, was the year 5600, which was 1840 of the Common Era. And if you look at that date, that was indeed a very pivotal year. It was the year of the Industrial Revolution, the Enlightenment, so-called. All of that happened around that time. But the year was also a pivotal one for as a problem for, and indeed the Industrial Revolution and the Enlightenment both spiritually were problems. It led to mass alienation from Jewish observance. It led to mass alienation of villages and communities into cities. Many things happened at that time that was a major problem for spirituality. Prior to that, there was another date that was predicted, and that was the date of 5408, 1648, and that turned out to be the beginning of the end for Polish Jewry. That was when the Chmielnicki's Polish riots, the serfs rose up against the Polish masters, and instead of it remaining a peasant rebellion, it turned into a witch hunt against the Jews, which sadly happened far too often. So in the course of a few more years there in that time, again, we're talking about this time here, more than 500,000 Jews were brutally massacred, while nearly 1 million others were forced to flee to Western and Southern Europe. So this was a time when everyone said, the Messiah's got to come now. The Messiah's got to come now. And indeed, and this is the point I'm making here, this led to the rise of Shabbatai Zvi, who is one of the most infamous false messiahs in Israel's history, next to Yeshua, who further fragmented the already reeling Jews. The problem is with the mystical nature of prophecy, and yet we often see, as with above, very significant events during those predicted times. Even though the Messiah did not appear, there were other reasons, but they were definitely times that we needed to be very cautious of and very careful of, and recognize the importance. So I mentioned Mincha. There's also a tradition that Messiah will come during the Mincha prayer service, which starts about 12:36. It can be prayed anytime before Ma'ariv. So we're in that period right now, in 5785, in that Mincha time period. And to that effect, I want to break down with a little more detail the year of Friday, which we are in now, which runs from 1240 to 2240, and the significant things that took place today in the past. So again, keeping in mind the quote is, "A woman with child who draws near to the time of her delivery suffers and cries out in pain. So have we been before you, God." That's from Isaiah 26:17. The cosmic clock in Western calendar time is what we're showing here. Friday is the day of Mashiach. It starts Thursday night. So if we consider the sixth day, Friday, in terms of hours, we can begin to see the pattern of labor pains, complete with false contractions and increased level of pain and frequency. So let's look at the significant hours in the sixth day. So from 12:40, 6 p.m., we have on Thursday the time of the Arizal, the time of mysticism growing, the enlightenment for Judaism happening in Maimonides around this time period. So many things. This was like dawn breaking, or at least the end of the day, but the light before the darkness falls. Okay, and then the next time to look at is 1740, which is then we've gone through the darkness. All of the things that happened between 1240 and 1740, the pogroms, the many evils that befell Israel during this time. It was definitely a dark period. But then in 1740, we begin to see a dawn, an enlightening. It was the time of the Baal Shem Tov, the start of the actual day, beginning of the final soul's return. There's some prophecy that says that before the Messiah comes, all of the souls that are ready to be born into the world are depleted, are done. And when that happens, then the Messiah comes, and there's some interesting figures that you can look at in terms of 9 billion as the number of souls that are there, and we're pretty close to that, or we're already there perhaps, in terms of the population on Earth today. At any rate, so 6 a.m. again, we see the darkness that we went through, and then we see the light. So we have that false labor pain, and then we have a time of peace between pains. Then in 1840, in the 600th year, 5600, we have the Age of Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution. The world sees this as two positive things. Judaism sees this as two very negative things that happened. Again, I could spend a class on each one of these time periods, which I'm not going to do, but you can look them up and study for yourself. But this is a very dark time, again, a very dark time as we approach, or at least not darkness in terms of it's 8:30 in the morning, but a darkness in terms of the spirituality, what's going on. The labor pain is happening here in great. So we think, okay, there's going to be a birth, but no, then we have another time of peace. In 1909, Isaiah 60:22 talks about this. It's the end of Shachrit, the light of day is established, and here we have Tel Aviv is the first kibbutz founded in Israel in 1909. So that we have the beginning of the Zionist movement, the beginning of many returns, desire to return to Israel by many Jewish groups. And then 80 some years later, we have in between here and there, we have World War I, World War II. We have, the Holocaust, certainly a very dark, very dark, very dark time. And again, that darkness meaning that very severe labor pains, more labor pains perhaps than any time prior to it. The Holocaust represented that huge pivotal time of pain for Israel, for the Jews. And then in 1990, we have once again that labor pain eases somewhat. We have 12 noon, the time when we really begin to prepare for Shabbat. It's the time of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Also, the Iran-Iraq War, Soviet wall comes down. Many other events that caused a fervent expectation that the Messiah's coming was imminent. So we have all of those things happening in that time period. We have then, again, we see as we approach throughout this time an increasing decay in morality and devotion to God, worship of greed, of mammon, all of these things happening. And then in going back up here actually into this time period, 1914 we have labor pains as resumes, begin to get harder. We have the terrible wars that took place. 1948, then with the establishment of Israel, it seems certain that the birth is imminent. Israel's established, so we have that labor pain from the Holocaust, and now we have some respite from it in 1948 with the establishment of Israel. But Israel is established but not dedicated to God and Torah, and wars and corruption continue to envelop the world. So then we come to 1990 when we really begin to prepare. We have many other events that take place there that say that the Messiah's coming is imminent. But then in 1994, we have the Rebbe's passing, and many people believed he would be the Messiah for this generation. But he died, and that ended that hope as we see it. So the next event, if you will, and we are in 2025 right now, so 7 years from now, is 2032, and that is, again, a time for Mincha prayer, and the prophecy that the Messiah would return. So anywhere in this time period, the Messiah could return. Anywhere up to 3 o'clock would be the Mincha times. And then 2240, we have the beginning of Shabbat. And so the idea here, the thing to take from all of this is, the rabbis say that the Messiah cannot come after 2240, at least, because there's no traveling on Shabbat. So if all of the Jews and all of Israel is supposed to return to Israel, that requires traveling. So that's one of the theories behind the fact that the Messiah has to come before this date. All right, so who knows? We could be decades or even centuries away from the Messiah. But, and that's the big but, it's very possible that we are imminently awaiting the return of Mashiach. A lot to think about, but why does it even matter? So we'll try and address that in our next presentation, as well as look at how these seemingly impossible things might come to pass. I hope you'll join me for that. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. For Yeshiva B'nai Noach, I'm Tom Averna. Shalom.